I saw that person who requested free bird. That's pretty good. I'm really tired, so that woke me up. Bainbridge, Islington, Northampton, Massachusetts, Leeds, Maine, Michigan, Sedona, Arizona, Northern Virginia, and there's Freebird again. Portland, Oregon, Minneapolis, Laconia, New Hampshire, Swansea, New Hampshire. Why have I been to Swansea, New Hampshire? I don't remember, but I have been. Grand Rapids, Michigan, Springfield, Illinois, home of Abraham Lincoln, who's been very much on my mind lately. For a number of reasons, actually. That photograph I posted the other day was a pretty powerful photograph of him. St. Louis, Missouri, Millbrook, New York, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Vashon Island near Seattle. Hey, where are my Facebook peeps? Pocatello. I say that, and then all of a sudden you guys arrived. All right. So somebody just asked, do I ever get as far south as Georgia? Absolutely. There are only 3 states to which I have not been yet. Buddy hasn't been to more than I haven't been to. He's got more to make up than I do. But the only states to which I have not been in the United States are Alaska and North and South Dakota. And I haven't been to the territories. So those are all on my list of places to go. Okay, listen, lots going on today, but I want to suggest looking at what's happening in the news in a slightly different way than the questions that came in, sort of we're building to. And that's that there is so much going on right now that I can't keep it all on the page, which is enormously frustrating to me. You know, I really like to do a snapshot of the day, and there's just been too much happening to make that, to be able to put down everything that is important to me. So what happens every night when I write the letters is I write the letter itself, and then the stories that don't make the cut go in after the notes in my own files, under what I call slag. I put capital SLAG, and the whatever I had to cut out of the letter goes down there. And one of the stories I've been following for a while now is the money that's flowing into Trump's ballroom. And I don't think that's actually been able to make it above the slag line, even though it's a story that I care deeply about. And there's more information there today that I may or may not get to. But the whole point of this is that there is tons of stuff coming at us all together. Really hard to make sense of it, and easy for your mind to pick one or two things that you think are all encompassing. But I suggest that one of the ways you should think about everything that's coming at us is that we have a lot of changes going on all at once. And they are changes that dramatically impact the future of the United States. So the changes that I want to call your attention to are the fact that Trump is falling apart and his presidency is falling apart. There is the United States and its position in the world is in real jeopardy right now because of Trump's war in Iran. I'll tell you a little bit about that's going on as well. So there's a lot of foreign affairs stuff jockeying, going back and forth. And at the same time in the United States, there are politicians, primarily Democrats, though a few Republicans, who are responding to the will of the people. And as they do so, they're both pushing back against the Trump administration and articulating new programs, new things they want out of the United States. And so as you look around, you've got all these different stories going on at the same time. And some of them are just eye-poppingly bad, and some of them are really sort of intriguing, and some of them are actually really eye-poppingly good. And it's hard to put all those things together because they're all sort of jumbling in one big basket. So I won't get to all of them, obviously. I could just sit on, apparently there's a streamer who just spends all their time reacting to the news online. I could totally do that. I could just sit here with my phone all day and comment on all the stories that are coming through these days, and we'd all be bored out of our minds. So we're not going to do that. But I will outline what I just suggested to you about the decline of the Trump presidency and what that looks like, and some of what's going on in Iran and how those two things are related, and perhaps some of the revisioning of the United States that is just beginning right now, but it's being picked up by a number of politicians, again, primarily Democrats, but some Republicans. So first of all, There was a story in the Wall Street Journal this weekend about the fact that Trump was so unhinged and so angry after the shooting down of the plane in Iran that his aides didn't actually keep him in the room when they were getting news from the front. Instead, they felt that his fury and his inability to manage the situation would do more harm than good. So they isolated him from what was actually going on and just told him the stuff that they thought he needed to know. That's a really big deal. That is a really big deal. If the commander-in-chief is incapable of being the commander-in-chief, that's 25th Amendment material, impeachment material. That's a really, really bad situation. Now, a number of you asked about the report that we have had over the weekend that Trump demanded the nuclear codes and that General Dan Kane wouldn't let him have them. I have not seen that myself from a credible source. I've seen it about 4 or 5 times, and it's my guess that somehow somebody took that story about how angry and inappropriate he was and took it a little bit beyond what information we now have would warrant. I could be wrong. There could be good, solid evidence of that out there that I just haven't seen. But it's not really a surprise because we know he talked that way in his first term. And we also know something that I feel has gotten really too little attention. And that's that in his first term, Trump's people initiated the development of sort of weaker nuclear weapons, strategic nuclear weapons than we'd had in the past, because they rejected the idea of massive deterrence and instead said, well, if we can create nuclear weapons that aren't as bad as the ones that would, simply flatten everything, we could actually use them, and that would be more of a deterrent than having nuclear weapons that nobody can use. And they did, in fact, develop those strategic nuclear weapons. And it's something that really hasn't gotten a lot of attention. But if you're interested, just Google it. Strategic nuclear weapons, Trump, and you'll see that information come up and what they were doing there. So it's not like you can see how somebody would have gotten there. Maybe Trump did do that. I personally have not seen anything that looked to me to be adequately sourced to say that that really happened, but it wouldn't be a surprise. So there was that story coming out over the weekend, but there was more than that. Remember that the Wall Street Journal is owned by the Murdochs, who are the Fox News people, the real right-wing media people. And they have been looking the other way, at least, when the Wall Street Journal's reporters put out stories like this for a long time now, which suggests that they have really soured on Trump. And that will really matter for the larger media ecosystem. And just to be clear, the Wall Street Journal's editorial page is far right. It's really, I read it every day just to see what they're talking about, but it's really far right. Their journalists are very, very good. They're good, solid journalists. Especially Josh Dawsey is one of the ones that I follow. He moved over there from the Washington Post, but he's a really good, solid political reporter. And in fact, there's not a reporter over there off the top of my head that I have a complaint with. So when you hear Wall Street Journal, remember, there's a real difference between the editorial page and the news desk, and that this reporting from, I think Dawsey was on the story I just told you about, but it was good, solid reporting. Now, at the same time, over the weekend, and I don't remember what day it came out, there was a story in The Atlantic about Kash Patel, who's the director of the FBI. And what it said was that he has a drinking problem, he's not spending much time at the office, and that he himself is a national security risk. Now, he went on the talk shows on Sunday to say this isn't true, because he's actually had issues with Trump before over what he did, a number of things he's done, but he has not been a rock solid FBI director. But Trump was especially upset about the pictures of him drinking in the hockey locker room of the U.S. men's hockey team at the Olympics. And so he sort of went on the television to say this is, the story is not true at all, and then really to try and court Trump again by saying we're about to arrest people who were involved in stealing the 2020 election. And Patel has sort of a history of getting in trouble with Trump and then throwing him some red meat. And that seemed to be what he was doing. Then on Monday, he came out and sued The Atlantic and the author of that piece for $250 million, for $250 million. And that would, in fact, involve having what's called discovery in the trial, which would mean that people would have to testify under oath. And immediately, journalists have filed Freedom of Information Act requests of the government wanting to see Kash Patel's schedules and whether or not there are any memos or law enforcement or security enforcement issues having the words hangover or drunk or anything like that. But there's something, not only is Kash Patel weakened and really a liability, not just for the country, but for the president. But there's something else about the stories that you're starting to see coming out of the administration. And that's, I've said this to you before, a tight administration, an administration that is working well, is not going to have leaks. People are going to be loyal to the team, and they're not going to want to jeopardize their relationships, and they're happy with where they are, so they don't tend to leak. The Trump administration is leaking like a sieve. I mean, this is one of the places where Pete Hegseth, as defense secretary, has tried desperately to stop the leaks there. Remember, he tried to get rid of all the journalists who were at the Pentagon and replace them essentially with right-wing hacks, and it didn't work. In fact, the good journalists continue to have sources from within the Pentagon, and they're still getting great stories. But the fact that the members of the FBI have turned on Kash Patel to this degree, that I believe there were 12 people at least cited in that Atlantic story, suggests that the cabinet offices are starting to fall apart. And you saw the same thing at the Department of Labor, where the Secretary of Labor has just resigned because so many people complained about her tenure there and the advantage she was taking of people, asking them to bring liquor for one thing to her offices, asking her to do personal tasks, and having, I think, men in her family, I don't remember which ones they were apparently making advances on the women staffers in the department. Anyway, she resigned. And what you're seeing, I think, is a number of things. One of the things that interests me here is it strikes me that MAGA Republicans for so long have complained about everybody in government simply using the place for their own interests, that they really believed it was true. Then this is sort of a form of projection. You think other people would act like you would. That's not actually what was going on. People in those positions were actually doing their jobs. And then once MAGA people got in there and treated them with the disdain that they had held for those jobs, you're watching it all fall apart. And so that suggests now Trump has lost his Secretary of Labor, his Attorney General, and his Homeland Security Secretary, all women, which is not a coincidence. But remember I said to you a few months ago that you had to start picking away at his cabinet because his cabinet was protecting him, and not just by acting in certain ways that protected him, but by deflecting the other attacks that would come on him. He could just push them off on his cabinet secretaries, and those cabinet secretaries are dropping. And you saw today on the Hill, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, just kind of getting eaten alive by people who were listening to him at a hearing. So more and more there is pushback against the administration, and that is a reflection in part of Trump's weakness, but it is also a way to weaken him. Those two things work together. All right. So what else do I mean by what's going on here? Iran. So if you remember, Trump went into Iran on February 28th, striking alongside of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, had given a presentation to Trump convincing him that it would be sort of quick and easy to go into Iran and suggesting to him he could be a great hero if he did so. A presentation that he has made to every president, I think, since George W. Bush, and they've all said to him, this is, as somebody from the New York Times reported after Netanyahu's presentation to Trump, that it was delusional, that was simply not the way things were going to go. But Trump bought it in part because he had that quick strike against Venezuela and expected he could do the same thing in Iran. And instead, what he did is he kicked a hornet's nest, and then he stomped on a hornet's nest, and then he rolled on the hornet's nest. And then all the other hornets came and he fought with them as well, because there's a real asymmetry between what the United States can do with all its extraordinary military might and what Iran needs to do in order to be able to declare victory over the United States. Those two things are asymmetrical. So the U.S. has done an enormous amount of damage to Iran, and Israel as well has done an enormous amount of damage to Iran. And Israel, of course, has been bombing southern Lebanon as well, where the Iranian-backed Hezbollah operates. They're a non-state actor, but they're backed by Iran, and they're not part of the Lebanon's government. So the recent ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon's government was that was the ceasefire that stopped the bombing in southern Lebanon for about a minute and a half. They're still, theoretically, the ceasefire is still holding. I don't quite understand how you can have ceasefires when everybody's still firing at each other, but there you go. I guess it's reduced. I don't know. But anyway, he expected that this is going to be quick and easy. And instead, what happened is that while the United States and Israel have done an enormous amount of damage, as I say, all Iran has to do to maintain victory or to maintain that they are succeeding over the United States is to survive. And in this case, to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is pretty easy to do. That's that strait through which about 20% of the world's oil travels, and more than that of liquid natural gas, and I think it's about 30% of the components of fertilizer. And you can really close it largely by threatening. And what that means is that the big world insurers that are all of them backed by Lloyd's of London, which I talked about to you a few days ago, the insurers say, we can't insure you. And if you can't be insured, you can't run a ship. At the end of the day, who gets insured is and how insurance works is remarkably interesting. And someday I will do a whole lecture on insurance, because that really, once you get insurance, which comes from Lloyd's actually, Lloyd's actually started in a coffee house. I'm sorry, I won't go deeply in this rabbit hole, but it's sort of interesting. They started to insure ships by all the ship owners getting together and saying, we'll pool our resources to make sure that, it's called underwriting. They literally would put their names under each other's so that if one ship goes down, you don't lose everything. We all take a hit, but everybody can continue to function. And that's basically how we got the modern concept of insurance. And I'm going to stop there because it's really interesting how that translates to America. And it's killing me, but I'll stop there. Anyway, he expected this was going to be easy, and it hasn't been. And he keeps screaming at people going, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning. I won. This is great. Everything's lovely. And then Iran says the strait is closed because you're not doing what you said you were going to do. And he keeps screaming, you can't do that. You have to open the strait. And remember, first of all, he tried to get other countries to open the strait. And they were like, dude, it's not our problem. We didn't kick a hornet's nest. And then he tried to threaten Iran into opening the strait. Remember, he said, civilization's going to die. And then over the last weekend, he simply said, great news, it's open. Everything's great. They're never going to close it again. And meanwhile, Iran's like, not really happening until you stop blockading our ports, which is what Trump has been doing. So what this has done is it has, first of all, dramatically weakened the United States, and it has dramatically strengthened Iran, but it's also made the United States look incredibly erratic, because Trump will say one thing and his advisors will say something else, and then he'll turn around and change what he said. So, for example, he said that Vice President J.D. Vance was not going to Pakistan for talks, and then he said he was, and then he said he was on his way at the same time that J.D. Vance actually was in a motorcade pulling up to the White House. And then as of today, the talks were off, and he said he was not going to extend the ceasefire with Iran, which ends tomorrow. And then tonight, he said, I'm going to extend it indefinitely. And the bottom line is Trump has no good options in Iran. There really are no good options, simply because it's so easy for Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz, and it is not easy at all for Trump to force it to open again. And so probably what we're going to see there is Trump taking a huge loss and simply announcing that he won. And it will probably look like Iran reopening the strait in some form, and probably being able to either put a toll over the strait or have access to its frozen assets that are still around the world. But it's a really big problem for Trump. And one of the things that's going to come out of this, of course, is we're starting to see now is that gas, the price of a barrel of oil is sold as oil futures. And now we have seen the last of the oil from before Trump invaded coming to other countries. And so what you're going to see now is the more expensive oil starting to move its way into the system. And as that expensive oil moves its way into the system, you're going to see prices rising even more than they already are. So we've already seen inflation. You're going to see more and more inflation. And about 80% of the oil infrastructure in Iran has been damaged by the bombing, and it's also been damaged in other Middle East countries. So going into the summer, you're looking at really high prices, and it just is. That's the way it's going to be, and that's not going to help Trump's approval ratings, which are at all-time lows. There was a new poll out today that had him at 35% job approval, which is about the level, actually a little bit lower the level that George W. Bush was at the very end after Katrina and all that. And Trump's there now, and there's no sign of how that could possibly come back. All right. So there's a couple more things about what's going on here. With this weakening of Trump, you're seeing two real things. You're seeing, first of all, him doubling down on the idea of manipulating the vote in 2020. I'm sorry, what year we're in? 2026, the midterm vote. He's trying desperately to get voter rolls from around the states. And the reason for that is because he wants to get the voter rolls and run them through a piece of software that really crazily, confusingly has the same name as the SAVE Act. It's called the SAVE system. Totally different acronym. But what it was designed to do was to look through people who were applying for federal benefits, housing benefits, food benefits, whatever, and to see whether or not they were an undocumented immigrant. Now, he wants to use voter rolls to put through that system because he insists he's going to find undocumented immigrants voting. That's a myth. They just don't vote. There's no reason to. And the system, as it's been put into play in a couple of Republican states, has a failure rate of 14%. Up to 14%, meaning that people get flagged as being an illegal voter, as an undocumented voter, when in fact they are completely legal. And what this is going to do is going to tangle up all those voting systems. So he's doubling down on that very unsuccessfully. This is being fought in virtually every state, even Republican states. But he's doubling down on that. He's also doubling down on trying to rev up his base. And you see that this week in this idea that he's reading the Bible as part of this America Reads the Bible thing from a Christian nationalist group that has been associated with election deniers from 2020. And with that, it's a little bit insidious here. The verse that he is reading is the same verse that was read the morning of January 1st, 2021, and has been associated with him because it's the verse about God saying, I will send someone to heal your nation. And true believers for Trump believe that that was him. And so he is reading this verse that harks back both to the insurrection of January 6, 2021, and that says, remember, I'm your savior. At the same time that he has also been posting pictures of himself as Jesus and picking a fight with the Pope. So he's trying to double down on that group of people. It does not seem at this point to be working. What is more worrisome about the 2026 elections is that he has amassed a war chest of $350 million to influence these elections. And there seems to be more of that coming from especially the tech bros who are very concerned about Democrats starting to rein in some of their contracts, starting to rein in their government contracts, starting to rein in some of the ways in which they're trying to spread these data centers. They seem determined to keep Trump and the pro crypto, pro tech bro group in office. And that's out there right now, as is the fact that with all the problems from the economy from Trump's war in Iran, there's real trouble in the Gulf because they can't sell oil right now. And the United Arab Emirates, or UAE, there's recently a story that they had asked Trump essentially to backstop their currency using our tax money. And in the I'm afraid I don't remember what paper it's in today. There's a discussion of him actually saying, "Yeah, we're considering backstopping that currency again with our money from the Treasury." But you have to remember that the United Arab Emirates royal family, that their sovereign wealth funds have invested in Trump and the Witkoff family's World Liberty Financial, which is their cryptocurrency. And they put $2 billion into the stable coin of that cryptocurrency. So they have essentially lent the Trump family the use of $2 billion, and they get to keep the interest off that. And because of those ties now, or at least those ties are there, the United States Treasury is saying, yeah, we'll help you out because of the war Trump started. And I think, again, this is one of the reasons we're all so confused about so much stuff coming at us is it's really a rat's nest of ties and corruption in this administration, and it's going to be a lifetime to untangle it. But so while all that is going on, I will point to a couple of things to say, why this seems like it's not working. First of all, Tucker Carlson gave on a podcast, I think it was yesterday, apologized for encouraging people to vote for Trump and sort of saying, I have to examine my own conscience. We shouldn't have done this. Well, Tucker Carlson is an extraordinary opportunist. And the fact that he, like Marjorie Taylor Greene before him, is jumping ship suggests that he sees the writing on the wall and is hedging his bets for the future. That's a real big one. But then there is also the fact that in Congress, you're starting to see more and more people standing up against House Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican of Louisiana, who's in Trump's pocket. And pretty dramatically last Thursday, he lost on two major votes. And by major, I mean, you probably didn't even read about it, but they mattered because one was about immigration and one was about surveillance. So they were this. When Kristi Noem was the Secretary of Homeland Security, she and the guy who was advising her, Corey Lewandowski, who were close to Stephen Miller, wanted to get rid not just of the criminal undocumented immigrants, which was their cover story. They basically wanted to get rid of immigrants, primarily immigrants of color, everywhere in America. And there are about 350,000 immigrants from Haiti in the United States who were invited here after the Haitian earthquake of 2010, and they're under something called temporary protected status. And there are a lot of people from a lot of countries, Cameroon, Ukraine, Afghanistan. There are a lot of people from a lot of countries under temporary protected status. And what that means is you're here legally, but you're here because there's something happened in your home country that means it's not safe for you to be there. An earthquake, tsunami, war. There's some reason that you qualify for protected status. But just to be clear, protected status is not a pathway to citizenship. And protected status has to be renewed periodically, and it is. And there's a system for renewing it. It's a pretty complicated system, actually, for renewing it. But generally, it's just renewed unless a war stops or unless, all of a sudden the infrastructure is rebuilt or whatever, which has not been the case with Haiti, which has been a real mess since that earthquake. Anyway, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, basically, when the temporary protected statuses came up, she just said, no, we're not going to renew these. Haiti's safe, you can go home. Completely not true. And those things have been challenged, and they've been challenged on the grounds, and a number of grounds. But one of the grounds is that, listen, you didn't check any of the boxes. There's actually a procedure here that you were supposed to do and you didn't. Anyway, as soon as that happened, as soon as she did that, the Haitians in the United States sued and said, she didn't follow the rules at all. And a judge took a look at this and said, yeah, you're right. She didn't. And so I'm going to put that on hold. Your temporary protected status exists until these cases go through the courts. But this makes for, are you safe? Are you not safe? And remember, J.D. Vance himself went after the Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio. This is the eating dogs, eating cats thing. And so there has been a move in Congress to protect, to extend that temporary protected status for these Haitians. And it was spearheaded by Representative Presley of Massachusetts. She's a Democrat. And Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, close to Trump, said, you can talk about it all you want. We're not going to do it. I'm not going to bring it to the floor. Have fun. And discharge petitions used to be really, really, really rare. So a discharge petition is when there's a fight and members of Congress want something to be voted on, and the Speaker of the House says ain't going to happen. A majority of Congress can say, oh yeah, it is going to happen. But they're really rare because that means that the majority in Congress has to side with the minority to overrule their own speaker. So I think it happened like 7 times in 25 or 30 years. And now it's happened 7 times in 2 years because it keeps happening to Johnson because he's not listening to the members of Congress at all. He's just listening to Trump. Anyway, Republicans signed on to this extension of the temporary protected status for Haitians. And not only did they sign on to the discharge petition, when it came to a vote, more of them signed on to it. I think ultimately it was 20 Republicans who said, yeah, we want to extend temporary protected status for these Haitians. And why is that significant? Because it'll go to the Senate, probably won't pass the Senate. Even if it does pass the Senate, Trump's never going to sign it. It's significant because 20 Republicans pushed back on immigration and said, you guys have gone too far. You got to stop this. And so he lost that on last Thursday. But then there was another thing as well that you'll hear a lot more about from me because it's a really interesting issue. And that's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, if you've seen that, FISA, needed to be renewed as of April 20th, which was yesterday. And there's a problem with FISA. There's a number of problems with FISA, but there's a real mood building in the United States over surveillance and what's happening with surveillance by our government for sure, and that's part of what DOJ was doing, and it's what Palantir does, and so on. But also like what companies are doing and the relationship between us and our government and business, and how much should they really know about us. I went to do something today actually on an app that I hadn't used in a while, and it said, we can't find what you're looking for. You need to give us access to, and I read the fine print, to my emails. They wanted to be able to look at all of my emails. And this was an app it was just related to travel. And I thought, I'm sorry, I missed the news flash. Did hell freeze over? And in fact, I didn't have to do that. But the way they had, once I made it go away, I didn't need it at all. But the idea that I would give a company access to all of my emails is just bonkers, right? Anyway, there's this conversation going on about how much access the government should have to us, because we have in the Constitution something known as the Fourth Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment protects Americans from unreasonable searches and seizures. And that the government has, or courts have interpreted to mean, for example, that the government cannot intrude on your home, for example, without getting a judicial warrant. So a police officer could go to a judge and say, hey, I think she's, making something illegal in her house, and I have some evidence of that, and I want to go look. A judge has to sign off on that. And that's actually not very hard to get, but you can't just say, I think it's in there, I'm going for it. So the Trump administration has ignored that for ICE raids and for federal agents' raids into people's homes. And there's a huge outcry over that. I'm one of those people making that outcry because, again, this is very settled law that you must have a judicial warrant. You can do it, but you got to ask a judge. You can't just say, me and my buddies think you got something in there. You have a person in there or whatever. So that's already on the table. But this Section 702 of FISA is really interesting because it has to do with electronic communications, so or phone calls. So the United States cannot spy on American citizens without a judicial warrant, but it can spy on foreigners. And so under FISA, they can collect information from foreigners. But what happens when a foreigner is talking to somebody in the United States? United States people, or citizens, get picked up as well. And then once they're in the system, it is possible for someone to say, hey, is so-and-so in your system? I would like to see that. And so they would be able to get that information without actually getting a judicial warrant. Anyway, Johnson tried to get that through, an extension of that through, and I forget for how many years. I think it was 5 years. And what's interesting about that is that there was a coalition in the House who said no. 4 Democrats sided with Trump, but more Republicans sided against him. So you had a coalition of Republicans and Democrats who said no. We gotta protect the Fourth Amendment. You gotta stop this. So then he tried to get that through in the middle of the night, and everybody's running back to the House to say, no, we're going to vote on this. And then he said, okay, we'll only renew it for 18 months. At that point, even Republicans said to him, we're not even going to let you bring that to the floor. So he could only extend it for 10 days, I think it was. It might have been 2 weeks, but I think it was 10 days. And what that says is a couple of things. First of all, that Trump is no longer able just to order all the Republicans to do what he wants. They're starting to crack. But I was really interested in that vote because, for months I've been saying that what we're going to see coming out of this time is a lot of new alignments because they're new issues. Like this issue of electronic communications is not one that kept, Ronald Reagan up at night because we didn't have them back then. And so we're starting to see some cracks going forward. And so that's another thing that's interesting right now. And let me let me leave you then with some of the ways in which I think you're seeing real realignments and real forward-looking stuff, with Trump sort of collapsing this vagueness here in Congress over the future. But now you're really starting to see Democrats articulating what they want for the future and pushing back against Trump. And you're seeing it partly because you have 650 million Democrats running for president, and I'm exaggerating by about 2 people. They're all running. Everyone's like, who do you think's going to run? All of them. Sorry, but that's just the way it is at this stage of the game, and that's a good thing. We want to have all their ideas. And it's interesting because if you watch really closely, you can see different ones picking out their specialties. Now, that's not going to be the way it's going to end up. Obviously, what you're going to end up with is a crackerjack cabinet, because a lot of those people are going to end up in a cabinet, and 1 or 2 people rising to the top. And I don't know who that's going to be. And that's sort of the fun of where we are right now, is you're seeing, think of Lincoln and Team of Rivals, right? Going into the 1860 nominating committee in Chicago, and the fact it was in Chicago was a really big deal because that gave Lincoln a leg up. The front runner was William Henry Seward of New York, and the second in line was Salmon P. Chase of Ohio. And then, Lincoln was kind of in the running, but he really came out of, he was the dark horse in a lot of ways. By far the best choice, by the way. But then he took all those other people and he brought their coalitions and he brought their ideas into his cabinet. And we're going to see something very similar in 2028. But as you're watching these people, you're watching them really start to articulate complaints about the extraordinary corruption of this administration. And as they talk about the corruption of this administration, the fact, for example, that Jared Kushner has, is on the payroll of the Saudis to the tune of at least $2 billion and is angling for more investments in the Middle East at the same time he's supposed to be negotiating for the United States, and he has no official role in the government. You're starting to see that. But as you see that, you're also starting to see newspapers, mainstream newspapers, pick up those stories. Now, the indies, the independent newspapers, have been going at this for a long time, which is one of the reasons that the lawmakers are starting to speak up about it. But you're starting to see the water, the political water in which we swim, changing. And you're starting to see, again, more pushback, more really standing up to Trump and his people, and more articulation of what's wrong with this administration, but also articulation about what we want going forward. So I know Senator John Ossoff of Georgia was very much in the news over the weekend about corruption, but then you had Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker talking about, hey, where's our tariff money? The minute that the Supreme Court said that Trump's tariffs were unconstitutional, within like hours, he literally sent a bill to the White House and said, this is how much money you owe the people of Illinois, pony up, dude. And he hasn't let it go. So you're seeing that, them sort of pressuring. But then you also have people talking about investing again in science. And who was it today? I'm going to go with Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, but don't quote me on that one. Talking about education and making education important again. And you're starting to see people envisioning a future. And that, I think, and then you had former President Barack Obama and New York Governor Zoran Mamdani opening preschools yesterday it was, or I think it was, or the day before. It's very cute. But then you're also seeing, both in Illinois and in Massachusetts, I think, and probably other places, doing it off the top of my head in an inventory here, looking at new ways to increase housing, probably also in New York as well. So you're seeing more and more envisioning of what a future could look like. And as I say, I think this is why everyone's exhausted, is because it just keeps coming at you all the time. And it's going to continue to do that as Trump deteriorates, because the more he deteriorates, the more crazy stories there'll be. But also the more people will be undercutting him. When you see stories about the White House, remember, those are people leaking. And you're also going to see more Democrats and Republicans stepping forward and saying, there's more room for me here than there was before. So going into this summer, I told you these were going to be the crazy months. The springtime was going to be bonkers. And, I think I gave you a date of we're going to have some big answers by May. And, I don't know, I predict the past, not the future, but we certainly seem to be on track to know a lot more about the future of America in the months to come than we did back in February before Trump went to war with Iran. So once again, I'm going to urge you to keep your voices heard. And as you are seeing politicians get involved in things that matter to you. And at this point, you can find anything. There's organizations working on electronics in schools, other people talking about gun safety regulation, other people talking about healthcare rights, people talking about education, people talking about the environment. I mean, we got it all. Speak up. This now is the building time. And the work of building is going to take a really long time. But now is the time when we envision what our future can look like. Think, I've talked a lot about what happened after the great crash of 1929, when Hoover clearly was not up to the task of repairing the American economy and the nation itself. People articulated what they wanted, so that when FDR came in 33, he's elected 32, he takes office in March of 33, he hit the ground running. And we're in that envisioning period now. So don't sit this one out. Now is the fun time to say, hey, that's a really cool idea. I never thought about that. I want to know more about that. And that is, that's kind of the where we are now. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that things are going to be easy from now on. I don't know about you. As I told you, I'm exhausted, and I don't mean sleepy exhausted. I just mean it's been coming at us now for close to a decade. But and Trump is very much still president, most powerful man in the world, erratic as can be. We don't know what's going to happen next. The world is changing around us because we reelected Trump. Other countries are cutting us out of trade. They're cutting us out of defense organizations. They're really reorganizing the world without us at this moment. We're going to have to deal with that going forward. Lots of stuff is going to be really bad, but there is spring in the air. And I don't mean that just in terms of the weather. So make sure you enjoy it and you get out there and be part of, the world that is re-envisioning what our future can look like. On that note, I had intended tonight to write about Earth Day. I've got a number of pieces I've written over the years about Earth Day, which is tomorrow. But there was so much going on, I wrote a real letter tonight. But what I do have is my friend Liza Donnelly and I, the cartoonist for The New Yorker, and for her own Substack called Seeing Things, did a cartoon about Earth Day. And it looks really great. So once I turn this off, I'm going to post that. Earth Day is tomorrow. Enjoy it, and I will see you again. I am on the road, but I expect to be back here normal time on Thursday. If not, I'll let you know. We may have to wiggle a little bit this week, and see where I end up. But thank you for being here, and I will talk to you again soon.